What's up, guys? I get a lot of people that ask me how do I edit my photos, what do I use, and all that, and they always ask me for like tips and tricks. Not that I'm the greatest photographer in the world or the best at retouching, but there are people who like my editing style and they want to know how to edit the way I do. So I just thought I'd make a video. People have asked me to make tutorials before, and I figured why not. So as you guys can see, I edit my photos in Adobe Lightroom. I'm using Lightroom 5. I don't have Lightroom 6 or Lightroom CC. This does me just fine. And I created this virtual copy of an image I'd already processed before, but I'm just gonna, process it how I normally would and just talk about it as I go through. So one of the first things I do when I am editing a photo, I'm in the develop module, open up the basic panel, and I'm not going to go really in depth about how to operate Lightroom. I would hope that you have a general understanding of how Lightroom works. I'm just going to lightly touch on the things that I do when I'm editing, not give you a breakdown of all the features of Lightroom. But the very first thing I would do is fix my exposure. So this photo's a little dark to me, so I'm going to brighten it up just a touch. And I don't like how the white here on the shoe is a little bit too bright to the point where it's like clipping, so I'm just going to bring the highlights down just to recapture some of that detail. And next I'll probably bring up the contrast. I usually don't exceed contrast past 45. Even to some other people that's quite a bit. Reason I go so high, a lot of people don't like to go like past 20, but the reason I go so high is because of what I do in the tone curve later on, but you'll see that when we get to it. So I'm going to bring up the contrast so I think it looks good. 35 looks about good to me. Next thing I'm going to do is I'll boost up the clarity just a little bit. A lot of people think that adding clarity is adding sharpness. It's not really adding sharpness. Clarity is more like it's like sharpness contrast. That's a weird way to explain it, but that's the best way I can think of. The next thing I would probably do is go to the tone curve, and what I like to do is make this little S curve right here, which will add a bit more contrast. I'll probably make it, or better yet, what we can do, and if you guys don't see all of these on yours, it's because I installed some free VSCO presets that I don't ever use, but you can go to medium contrast, and then I'd like to delete this point right here, and then bring this point up to around 10%, and that's how I get that like faded film vintage look that a lot of people ask me about. Well, that's how you do it right there. Next, I want to change the color of the leaves because I don't like how they're more yellow than orange, and I want them to be like a very vibrant, almost reddish orange color. So what I'm going to do is I'm in the color panel, and I'm just going to take the hue of the orange and slide it to the left, and I think that looks really good. And I might even bring up the saturation a bit. Looking at it now, this photo still looks a little too dark for me, so I'm going to boost up the exposure even more. Actually, I'm going to bring it back down just a touch and bring the highlights down. I can probably get away with bringing the highlights down to -100. Yeah, that actually doesn't look half bad on this photo. So I think I might even bring up the contrast all the way up to 45. I also don't like these bits of green that I'm seeing in the background, which are just like pieces of grass that were sticking up. So I'm going to go back into the color panel, and I'm going to go to the hue of the green. I'm going to slide it all the way to the right, and then I'm going to bring the saturation down a lot. And then I'm going to go into the yellow hue, and I'm going to slide that all the way to the left. And actually that looks really, really good to me. Now a lot of people don't like that because they'll think it looks fake. I mean, to each his own. Everyone has their own editing style. This is mine. I mean, a lot of people want their photos to look as natural as possible. I get that. I am a fan of natural looking photos. However, my technique is not a natural editing technique. But anyway, next I'm just going to go to the effects and add a slight vignette. Just 5, because a lot of people, alright, so if you're shooting on a lens that has anywhere from like a 1.2 to a 2.8 aperture, if you're shooting it wide open, odds are your photo has vignetting automatically from the aperture being open so wide, and you can get rid of that by going to lens corrections and enabling the profile corrections, and that's what most people would do. Me personally, I mean, obviously a lot of people aren't going to be a fan of this, but I am. I like to leave the natural vignetting on. A lot of times that's good enough for me, because the reason I don't get rid of it is because I add vignette anyway. So if I'm just going to add a vignette, I don't bother taking it off unless the photo is distorted a lot. which means, like, say if you're using like a wide angle lens and you're close up to your subject, then you'll have to enable the profile corrections in order to fix that distortion. But I shot this with a 35 1.4, so, and I'm pretty decent distance away, so it's really not that distorted. So it doesn't bother me at all. So I'm just gonna leave the lens corrections alone. And so, like I said, I'll just add a slight bit of an extra vignette, so -5 on that, because it already has a natural vignette and it already looks pretty good to me. And like I said, I go back and forth a lot through these different panels when I'm editing a photo. Like I said, I keep going back to the exposure because it looks less and less bright to me as I edit these photos. So I'm just going to bring up the exposure just a little bit more. That looks pretty good to me. Now I can see here if I zoom in that I have some chromatic aberration in here. Now you can go into lens corrections, check remove chromatic aberration, go over the color, and slide the slider to the right, and it'll remove the chromatic aberration. But depending on how far you slide it, it might start removing color from other parts of your image. So as you can see here, it's removing like all the maroon from my shoe. So instead of doing that, what I would rather do is just take the adjustment brush, and I'm just going to reset all these settings, and then slide the defringe all the way up to the right. And since this is white, I can even slide desaturation to the left, and I'm just going to brush over it, and that'll get rid of the chromatic aberration. And actually, since these shoes have a bit of a blue tint to them, I might have to bring the saturation back up so that it doesn't look like a spot that's missing color. But yeah, I mean, that's just a quick way to get rid of chromatic aberration. And that, honestly, that looks pretty good to me. I mean, sometimes I can spend 2 minutes on a photo, sometimes I can spend 2 hours. Honestly, if I wasn't recording this video, this photo probably would have taken me 2 minutes to edit, but I've done photos that will take me 2, 3, 4 hours to do because I'm constantly going back and forth through these settings. But I mean, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's about it. So I hope you guys liked this video. I mean, people were always asking me how do I edit my photos. They're always asking me for tips and tricks. So I just figured that I'd make this video. I mean, I think I might go take my adjustment brush real quick and just bring down the highlights to about 50. That's close enough. And brush over the background because I don't want it so bright. Maybe the foreground too. That looks pretty good to me. Yeah. So that's really it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think.